Hey folks, it's Fernando doing another video for the Modern Survivalist. I'm going to be doing a video now on selecting the right knife, the right survival knife for your bug out bag. I just did the video on putting together a bug out bag, a realistic kit for getting you from one place to the other. And so just watching it, if you haven't done so already, I think it turned out quite well. It's more of a generic bug out bag, and it's not addressing certain specifics such as extreme weather conditions and personal circumstances, but I think it's a good primer for putting together a personal kit. If you prefer to read instead, this is a video based on my book's chapter on the bug out bag in my book Bugging Out and Relocating. If you go to that video and you look in the description below, it will take you to my website where the full article, the actual chapter of my book on bug out bags is posted online if you prefer to read it instead. So going back to knife selection, I went this way. I didn't want to spend a lot of time addressing the topic of knives alone when talking about putting together a bug out bag. That's why I'm doing it separately. I think it's important enough, especially because this is going to be your main tool. You know, it's your main tool for dealing with whatever it has been thrown your way, whatever problem you have. Your survival knife will be it, especially if that's all you have. So you have to be selecting very carefully what you pick here. All right, so I'm going to be going through a few lines of thought. Then, you know, which one is correct. I'm pretty certain that the way I go about it, I think that my final conclusion is the best. That's my way of seeing it. But that doesn't mean that anything is particularly wrong with any other one. Usually you will have different lines of thought, some a little bit more militaristic, some a little bit more of the bushcraft small type of blade. In general, people that are more of a bushcrafty approach to things, so as to put it some way, focusing more on the knife as a cutting tool. All right, that makes sense. In general, you will find that people that have more of a wilderness approach to survival and like bushcrafting and wood lore, they like a small knife that is very, very sharp, something along the lines of a Mora knife, right? This is a Mora knife made in Sweden, great knife. It's a Scandi grind. You see that line there? This is a Scandi grind blade based on the traditional Puko knife. Puko knife, the Nordic knife, is pretty much this same shape with a wooden or horn handle, but in terms of the blade shape, this is usually what you have. You have larger versions, but this is a traditional knife. The Mora is a very typical knife, and it works very, very well. It's very sharp. It's great for cutting, for carving, and for someone looking specifically for a cutting tool, this is very good. And there's nothing wrong with that. For people that just want a sharp knife, the Mora, it's pretty much hard to beat, especially because of the price. It's very affordable, well made, the steel is good. I like it as well. There's nothing wrong with it. I actually like it so much. I have several Hultafors. This is a little bit similar. You know, those are a few, but I have several more floating around different places. I've given these away as gifts for people when going hiking and someone that doesn't actually have a knife, which is kind of ironic, but you know, for folks that are into survival, preparedness, or outdoors activity and maybe they don't have a knife, I bring one of these as a spare, and usually it ends up being going home with someone else. Hultafors, again, similar blade shape, as you can see. I'm trying to be careful not to cut myself, but I have the camera right in between my hands, so looking a little bit more clumsy there. You see how it's pretty much the same blade shape with little variations. This is in fact a little bit more traditional. This is a little bit more of a clip point, but you still have that nice Scandi grind. I do like from the Hultafors. Well, I actually found them very affordable, so that's why I bought several. But I like the handle, the color, orange. It's a good color so as to not lose it easily. In this case, and the finger guard, I think it's protecting the hand nicely. That's something that I could maybe be improved. It's nice grippy here in the clipper, but maybe more of a finger guard is something that I would appreciate. Some folks cut it off like that I think that's stupid and makes no sense. In a sharp knife, you want to have as much finger protection and hand protection as possible in case you're ever using it a little bit more forcefully and avoid having the hand slip. This is definitely what you want, and it's not impairing in any way any ability that you have with your knife, especially not if in terms of the security of use that you're getting in exchange. As you see, you have the stainless steel and you have a carbon steel blade. Carbon steel blade takes a little bit more of a patina, and rusts a little bit easier, but with minimum care, it's not a problem. This is better suited for survival. Some folks, more traditionalists, will frown at the use of anything that's not carbon steel. I think that's stupid because the advantages that you have are still there and then some. It's going to be taking just as good of an edge as your carbon steel blade, and it's not going to be rusting, and what's important, it's easier to clean up for using your knife for cutting food, preparing food, which is something that you will typically use, and it's easier to keep in good shape in general. It's also going to be cutting better, which is something a lot of people don't quite understand or keep in mind. Anything that has more of a texture, and we're going to be seeing that in a second, any blade that has more of a texture on the finish will not slide through material nearly as well as this polished surfaces. And just using my fingers, I can just see how this has less traction, and this in fact has a little bit more, and that's going to be making a difference when it comes to cutting. You know, still very good. And this is actually the knife that I have, you know, floating around my house for, you know, digging, scrapping, any general use type of task. It does work well. So wrapping up a little bit, at least in this philosophy, there's nothing wrong with the traditional Scandi grind knife. It has a place, and it's a well-earned one. For carving, for cutting, it will work. If you like something like this, I suggest going for this one, which is a heavy-duty version of the Hiltefors. It's a little bit thicker, a little bit sturdier, but much more solid, and you can abuse this knife beyond what you can expect to get out of a traditional Mora knife. The heavy-duty Hiltefors is a knife that you can use as a chisel to an extent and get away with it. No, you're not going to be chopping with this knife. It simply lacks the geometry and way to do so, but it's a knife that you can just baton with it. You can just get a hammer and go nuts on it. I at least haven't been able to break it. Everything can be broken, folks. If you put this in a vise, you put it in a pipe and start, you know, putting traction and bending it, the torque, eventually you will be breaking it. But it's a very strong, sturdy knife. I have some other nicer knives, maybe, you know, handmade custom knives such as this one. Is somewhat of the same philosophy, but here you see that we have a full tang blade instead. Nicer wood, of course, for the handle, but still a more of a traditional bushcrafty type of knife. Here you have a knife that's a little bit more solid maybe than the traditional Mora. You can abuse it a little bit more, still lacking that chopping ability, still lacking that pry bar thing that we're going to be seeing here in a second. This is actually one that I did myself. Yeah, not very good, but still very functional. Actually, this is a knife that I've beaten the crap out of. I've, you know, hammered this knife into place many times, used it as a chisel many times, and it's still holding on. Another knife somewhat similar in the smaller knife department. Here we have a little bit of a wider blade, maybe more of a hunting type of knife. Full tang, and again, you can do things with a full tang blade with a little bit more steel that you cannot do with the humble, even though excellent, Mora Scandi type of knife. Then you have folks that have more of a militaristic approach to things. In terms of a knife for fighting and such, maybe something like this. This is a cold steel peacemaker. This is, of course, a bigger blade. It's cutting. You know, it's a knife. It will cut, but it's intended for fighting. There's not much discussion about it there. It's more of a fighting blade. I don't think that this is particularly well suited for a bug out bag. I don't think that one is particularly well suited for a bug out bag either. But you do have a bigger knife. Maybe you can do a little bit more prying and such with this, but it's clearly knives that are suited for fighting. To an extent, the cold steel Kobun, which is an excellent knife as well. Yeah, maybe a little bit more of an older. These are made in Japan, or they were made back in the day, not anymore, as far as I know. But this is a knife clearly intended so as to be carried, concealed, and for a defensive use in mind. I don't think that a fighting knife is something they want to have in a bug out bag. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but I think that it's missing the point of what you're likely to end up using a knife during an emergency. Here we're starting to get a little bit more into the field that I think is closer. This is more of a utility combat type of knife, the cold steel SRK. This is favored many times by soldiers, you know, folks that are being deployed and such. It has that traditional utility type of geometry. It's this one, the Falcon even A1 and such. These are knives that are intended both so as to be used for fighting, yes, but most of all, these are utility knives. Okay, these are knives that are going to be used for general tasks that are called upon in the field. Again, an older cold steel. This is made in USA, carbon 5 steel. I think these go for quite a bit of money, and this is why I'm not really using it. Man, very nice, beautiful blade. The traction, the finish that you have here looks fantastic. I don't think it's nearly as useful as having a polished finish. The polished finish does make sense. Yes, of course, for combat use and such, and if you are, you know, killing a sentry in enemy territory and you don't want the reflection of your knife giving you out and such, sure. But for all practical purposes, a polish or fine satin blade makes more sense. This is a little bit more well suited. I think this is closer to what I would want to have in a bug out bag. It has that older leather sheath that's no longer being used. The newer one is actually nicer. I like the Kydex type of sheath better. So what is that I think you should go for in terms of a bug out bag or a survival knife? Since these are all options that I don't see anything particularly wrong with it, but what I think you should be going for, or what I had in my bag when I did the bug out bag video, is this knife. This is Bussy Boss Jack, if I'm remembering correctly. It's very similar in blade shape like the SRK. This is the kind of thing that I would like to have. The SRK is a great knife. The cold steel SRK would be a great knife to actually have in your bug out bag, no doubt about that. Yeah, you're gonna be finding the newer version that has Aus 8 steel and such, but this type of blade geometry, shape, and overall dimensions are pretty much ideal for when it comes to a bug out bag, a general purpose utility blade. In this case, this is a Bussy Boss Jack. The shape is very similar. The steel is better. The steel is Infi steel, which is a kind of steel that is very strong. It takes a beating. This is a kind of thing that I would like to have, because whatever happens and you just don't know what it is that you're going to be dealing with, this knife, within its limitations because of size and such, it will probably be able to deal with it. I'm talking here about a knife that I'm going to be using for prying. I'm talking here about a knife that I'm going to be using for smashing through stuff. If I have to pry open a door that has come out of frame, or even a car door, or breaking a window with it, or chopping through a piece of wood. These are all things that you can do with this knife. If I even have to dig, scrap, or you know, stab into the dirt and dig with it, you can do it with this knife. okay, and it's not going to be failing you. It's not going to be breaking. It can take a beating. There's little doubt about that. With this kind of knife, you can do that. With the SRK, I think that it's capable, maybe not as capable as this one in particular, giving the better steel and that you have a full tang, right? But it's very much in the same proximity. Let's take a look at the blade shapes just for comparison. Yeah, you see that it's a little bit bigger, and the tip is going to be a little bit less fragile on the Boss Jack, on the Bussy knife. This tip is a little bit more fragile, a little bit more prone to being broken if abused. Now, a very fine tip, by the way, with a nice job by Cold Steel back in the day. It's almost like a needle. It's crazy how sharp that thing is. Here you have a little bit more of a sturdier blade, at least in the tip. This tip is tougher. This is a tip that's going to be taking abuse better. So for the money, Cold Steel SRK would probably be what I would go for in a bug out bag. If you want to be spending almost 3-4 times as much with a Boss Jack, a Bussy, yes, it is better. Is it 3 times the money better? Probably not. This is probably something that will suit you just as well. But this is what I have in my bag, and it is without a doubt an excellent option within the limitations that it has. It's not a huge knife. We see bigger knives here. All right, let's put these away there for a second. It comes with a smashed cat sheath, which is very flat profile. It's nice for keeping it there. So about bigger knives, there's another school of thought, another philosophy about knives that says that a bigger knife is always better and you always need to have a huge blade with you. I'm in general the kind of guy that will favor bigger blades. I think that this is an acceptable size knife. For some folks, 3 or 4 inches is as big as they will go, and anything else is ridiculous and outrageous, and it's beyond the tasks of their wilderness survival applications. I'm not like that. I think that a big blade definitely has a place. This is an SC Junglas big knife, all right? What is it, a 10-inch blade? You have a blade that has clearly dimensions that will allow you to, pry with it, dig with it. Yeah, it's not going to be a shovel. If you want a shovel, get yourself an actual shovel. But what I'm talking about here is making with whatever it is that you have, okay? Making the best of whatever it is that you have. With this big blade, you can chop with it. It's not going to be an axe, but you're going to be chopping with it. You're going to be cutting through pieces of wood much faster than you would be doing with a small Mora knife. Someone was mentioning in a forum, yeah, give me a Mora knife or a Scandi blade knife and a baton, and I'm going to be going through a piece of 2x4 just as fast. Yeah, I understand that you can do it. You can cut a tree down with a Scandi grind knife, with a little Puko knife. You can cut down a tree eventually with your little Hultafors knife or Mora knife. It can be done. Now, is that nearly as fast or as nearly as efficient as using this type of blade? Of course not. Here, you would just start chopping away, and soon enough, you'll be going through whatever piece of wood is in front of you. That's the nice thing about this kind of knife. When it comes to being used in defensive applications, is this a great knife? Well, probably not. Soldiers will have something more similar to the Boss Jack or the SRK. This is more likely to go along the lines of an actual fighting knife. For a fighting knife, and in terms of how a soldier would use it, a fighting knife would be about these dimensions, 6 inches, 7 inches tops. Beyond that, you're going away from what is usually considered to be a fighting knife, so to speak. The SRK is closer to that K-bar fighting utility knife shape. Along those lines, this is, yes, more of a machete type of fighting knife, and you wouldn't want to be whacked with this knife. Absolutely not. Just stabbing with this knife, that tip that it has, it's going to be penetrating, it's going to be slashing, cutting, chopping. You can make a disaster in terms of using this knife for defense. It's going to be absurdly effective in that use. All right, but it has a size, it has a shape, a weight, a volume that makes it less suited for someone that's likely to be encountering that kind of situation. Someone that's likely to be fighting with a knife, unless you are in the in the jungle, in the Amazon jungle, fighting with someone over there. Probably this is not what you would think of in terms of a fighting knife. Still, I would go along the lines of, yes, bigger is usually better. All right, this is a big 10-inch blade, well made by a well-known manufacturer, SE. The Hundas is a great model, comes with a great sheath. This is actually $10.95. Criticism, yeah, the finish is still. I know that's being used a lot lately by manufacturers. I prefer a polished finish, but I see the point. I know that it cuts down costs quite a bit. Still a beautiful blade. The handle is very comfortable. Sheath is fantastic as well. Now, why not have this instead then in your bug out bag? Well, simply because of a matter of size and weight. This is just too freaking big. This is huge. Comparing it to a smaller, clearly smaller knife. Okay, when I put these two there, you see, it's almost twice as big. This is a knife that goes into a bag that ultimately I want a minimalistic approach in the bug out bag, because it's simply for me getting from one point to the other. It's not about gonna be, if you would be telling me that I'm gonna be spending the rest of my life in the jungle or in the woods, I would be taking this knife, no question whatsoever. I wouldn't even be taking one of the Scandi Mora type of blades. The rest of my life in the forest, I'm going to be taking this. Or if I have to live there for a month or build an actual proper shelter in the woods, yeah, this is the kind of knife that is going to be making all that easier. Now, this is more realistically in terms of something that it's a practical, useful, tough, and yet not huge. Some other options, trying to wrap this up. Do you have to spend $300 on a fancy bussy knife? No. It's something great. If you can do it and you like it, absolutely enjoy, go nuts. But you don't have to spend this kind of money always. You have much more affordable options. There's more of a bigger knife. There's the Condor Kumunga. Yeah, the sharpened pry bar philosophy here. Okay, the handle is not very good, it's maybe too rounded, but a big blade for what, $40 give or take. This is something that can do a lot of work. Same thing for the cold steel machetes. This is the cold steel Bowie machete. This is a steal in terms of what you get for the money. Man, this is a machete. It's going to be hacking, slashing. That tip that it has, if you even have to use this for defense, man, this is a knife that could be a fearsome weapon. That tip, you know, anything that's within 3 or 4 feet away from you, it's going to be in pretty much of a big mess if you can reach it. And this is what costs $15–20 with the sheath. This is something that if you are now talking about specific circumstances, if you are located in a place where there's lots of wilderness settings around you, if you're working in a forested area and you maybe have, and for your particular needs, bugging out means going 3 or 4 days walking across wooded areas or something like that, maybe this is something that would be well suited for you. This is something that will chop, will cut wood. Yeah, maybe a little bit of a heavier blade, maybe. There's more of a slashing through vegetation. It is actually a machete, so that's what it's well suited for. But this is a great knife for the money. If you don't want to be spending this kind of money for this type of knife, another excellent option is this one. This is the Strayed Extreme Survival SCH F9. I think it's like $40, $10.95 steel. The handle is maybe not ideal. You have to cut away a little bit of that that rubber that it has there, because it's a little bit, it has a few edges that are not as comfortable. But this is a knife that I've literally chopped down a tree with. A tree that was about 5 inches across, give or take, and you can chop it down with this knife. Okay, maybe not as easy to chop it down as with a junglas, but you can do it with a knife. And it's a knife that goes into that sharpened pry bar territory. You can pry with this knife. It's a big old blade, a big, fat blade, as you see there, and the full tang shows it quite nicely. It's a very sturdy blade. It's a knife that you can pry with. You can smash through through bricks with it, and it's not gonna be failing. It's not only not gonna be failing, it's actually capable of doing that. I cannot smash through a drywall with my Mora knife. It's very sharp, it's gonna be cutting, but I cannot use it for smashing through stuff. And folks will usually say, well, that's not what the knife is intended for. A knife is for cutting. Use a hammer for hammering. Use a pry bar for prying. I get all that. I understand it. But when there's a disaster, an emergency, and this is your one and only tool, I wanted to be able to do all those things. Smashing, cutting, hammering, prying, all right, even though it was not specifically intended for. To some extent, these are actually intended for that sort of thing. These are survival knives, and folks that are designing these, this is actually designed by Griffin Design, as it says here. These folks clearly had that in mind. Same with the Bussy. The guy that designed that knife clearly had in mind that someone was going to be abusing that knife beyond this simple task of cutting, which is usually what a knife is intended for. Yeah, and you could even defend yourself quite nicely with this knife as well. It comes with a sheath, which is amazing because for the price, it's actually quite, I think it's one of the best deals floating around these days. Couple more finally, so as to wrap it up. Bussy. This is a Team Gemini Light Brigade. I had polished this blade myself for just for that polished finish, which has those advantages. It slides through material better, cuts better. This is also a big blade. It's a blade that's heavy enough, heavy enough for chopping. You can chop effectively with it. I've called this a blade when I did the video review a K-bar on steroids. That's the sensation that I get out of it. It's looks massive enough, full tang, even though it's weight reduced a little bit. The only thing is these may not be as comfortable sometimes, but man, a fantastic blade. I would be close to replacing this the Boss Jack with this one. I think this is a more capable knife. But here is where weight and volume starts coming into play. This is pretty compact. This is not so much. This is more of a heavier, bigger knife. And again, I want to stay true to the concept of a minimalistic bug-out bag, because I don't want to have a ton of stuff with me. Maybe as an ideal, and this is, I understand that these may not make a lot of sense because these are not as easy to find, but the Bussy, I think it's a limited edition or BL6, if I'm remembering correctly. Yeah, it's the Basic 6, that's right. This is the Bussy Basic 6, which, yeah, not as easy to find, but an excellent blade. You have a very comfortable handle, a little bit like a machete handle, that depression here, and actually it's very similar, if you think about it for a second, it's very similar to what you have with the junglas. You see that blade, that handle shape? This is a great handle shape. To some extent it's similar, maybe not as big there, but you see what I mean? This is, in my experience, this is the most comfortable knife handle, especially for bigger blades. Right, and in this case, in the case of the Basic 6, it's made of what Bussy calls Respring C. This is a 6-inch blade, but because of the clever blade geometry, it's quite light in this area and quite blade heavy. So this is a 6-inch blade that actually chops very well. If I had to go for a wilderness survival, living in the woods kind of blade, or if that's something that I should be particularly concerned because of my location, my overall area where I'm going to be, this is probably the kind of knife that I would go for. Still compact enough, but because of that clever blade shape, it's going to be blade heavy. You can pry with it quite nicely. Can even use it for defending, but this is clearly a blade that will excel at those general cutting tasks, particularly for outdoors use, especially because of that, because I see it chopping quite nicely, and you can choke on the blade because of that choil. Not a fan of choils. Would have preferred even not to have it even, but if it's there, you can just choke on it a little bit. The blade finish is definitely something that I like, that satin finish. It's easier to keep clean. Yeah, it's a big full flat ground blade. You can see there is flat ground. I don't like much full flat ground blades because I think it weakens blades to a great extent, especially for some of them smaller folding knives, which is very popular these days, but that makes for a weaker blade. Now, with a bigger blade like this one, you can get away with that to some extent, especially when using excellent steel such as Infi steel. Yeah, no sheath. This one has to be provided by yourself, but you can put a little bit of kit there for proper wilderness survival type of knife. Folks, I think I've covered my and explained my general philosophy for selecting a fixed blade knife for your bug out bag. I hope you liked it. Take care, share the video if you liked it, thumbs up is always appreciated, subscribe, enjoy the rest of your weekend, have a great day.